friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and I'm coming to you from beautiful Northwest Ohio, where we have now experienced our first frost of the year here. The temperature has dropped significantly to the point where we needed to fire up the wood stove. And so we are definitely feeling the pressure of doing all of those last homestead preparations, putting everything to bed for the winter, really nailing down all of those last food preservation projects, and that's what I want to bring you in this video. It's going to be full of some fun October homesteading content. We're going to do some gardening, some food preservation, some cooking, just all sorts of things around the homestead here, and I'm going to bring you guys along. So if that's something that interests you, why don't you stick around? But before we get to the content of the video, I do want to thank the sponsors of this video, Backwoods Home Magazine, and they have a sister magazine, Self-Reliance Magazine. They're both wonderful publications. They've been around for 35 years, and Adam and I began reading this magazine over 15 years ago. We were living in the suburbs, dreaming about our homestead, and this is where we began learning about all of the things that I like to share with you in these videos. So if you like my homestead content, things about gardening, canning, self-sufficiency, all of those kinds of things, cooking from scratch, this is a wonderful resource for you, because I've mentioned before, not everything can be shared on YouTube. There is kind of a list of topics that are kind of a no-no that can get you censored, and these magazines will go in depth on those topics for you. You have two options. Backwoods Home Magazine is more the nitty-gritty homesteading stuff, a lot of hunting, processing of livestock on your homestead, that kind of content, whereas Self-Reliance does not contain that. So you have two options, and I want to say thanks to Backwoods Home Magazine for offering my viewers 50% off an annual subscription. Check out the link in the video description. This would make a lovely holiday gift for someone in your life that is interested in homesteading and all of the things that go along with that, gardening, cooking from scratch. You're going to love this, because Adam and I certainly do. So, all right. Speaking of homestead content, why don't we go ahead and get started and see what we are doing on October here at Three Rivers Homestead.
So October is the month here in our growing zone where we're beginning to think about putting the garden to bed for the year. There are still some items that are growing out in the garden and will continue to grow until we get a really hard freeze. We do have some kale and some cabbage out there and some cold hardy herbs and things. There are even some carrots that we can still harvest, and we'll continue to eat off those until it gets a little colder. But for the most part, the rest of the garden beds are ready to be put to bed, and I'm going to address that in this video. I'm not always the best about putting my garden to bed. By this point of the year, we're really focusing on homeschooling and things like that. So the last thing I have time for on my busy days is really getting out in the garden and cleaning out all of the year's work. So a lot of times I just trick myself into saying it's good for the pollinators to have little places in the garden to hide over the winter, and I'll leave some of that mess out there. But this year I am trying to do it while I can and while I have the energy, because I know next spring I'm going to have a very young infant and it's going to be a lot harder for me to get outside. So another thing that's going to be difficult for me once my new baby comes is making meals from scratch. And so I have been putting the final touches on my pantry. Food preservation season lasts year round here, and we're constantly emptying freezers and trying to get things shelf stable. But I did decide to do some more tomatoes just because we've been eating a lot of chili. These kids have been asking for chili twice a week sometimes. As a meal, and then we use our tomato sauce also for pasta dishes. So I just felt better if I got a few more jars of tomato products stored away, and so I really focused on that. And this is just that time of year. I'm just squirreling away as much as I can just to feel as prepared as possible heading into winter. One of those big food preservation projects that needs to be done heading into winter is storing apples. This is what we're going to rely on for our fresh fruit needs throughout the winter, along with a bulk citrus order that we usually place in the month of January. Now, Adam's grandpa owned an orchard when he was alive in a neighboring county, and every year we go there to get our apples. But unfortunately, the weather in Ohio this year, we had a severe drought, months without rain. It was just very dry, and apple production there in that specific county was very poor. So we were unable to get apples there this year, but we have to have apples. This is a staple. My children love to snack on apples. So we went to another local farm and we purchased 6 bushels of storage apples, and that's what we're working on here, getting ready for storage. Now, a lot of people aren't aware that the apples that you buy in the grocery store throughout the winter, those aren't picked fresh. Most likely, those were picked during the apple harvest season, which is this time of year. And then those apples in the grocery store, a lot of times they're sprayed with a coating that helps keep them fresh longer. They're often gassed with certain things that help keep them fresh. They're put in their plastic bags, and then they're kept in temperature controlled conditions that help extend that shelf life. Some of those apples can be 12 to 18 months old, and you won't even notice. When you bite into them, they'll still taste fresh. So that's what we try to replicate here at home, obviously without the chemical coatings or the gases. But we do take the boxes, the bushels of apples, and we like to put them in plastic bags. We can fit about a dozen per bag. It's the perfect amount to go grab one from storage and bring it into the kitchen. And 12 apples will basically feed our whole family one snack. But the plastic bags do help retain some of the humidity around the apples and keep them fresher longer. And we purchased a bulk box. It was like 1,000 plastic apple bags for maybe $30 last year. So we are going to have enough plastic bags for a decade or more to come. And it really made it an affordable option. Each bag is pretty cheap when you purchase them that way. Now, we have had apples stay crisp and fresh like this in the fridge until almost March before they start to go soft, and then we'll turn them into applesauce if there are any left over. We are definitely reaching the point where with the number of children we have and their sizes and ages that they will go through these 6 bushels in no time. But another thing that does affect the length of storage is the variety of apple that you choose. Not all apples are created the same. Some are going to be better for sauce making or baking, and some are good for storage. So this year we chose several different varieties. We did a Fuji apple, a wine sap, we did a Jonathan, we did a new kind for us, which is a Gold Rush, and we did Granny Smith. And every year that's what we do. We focus on storage varieties because the type of apple you choose definitely does matter. And we've already found that we think the Jonathan apples are not going to last as long as the others, so we're really focusing on eating those up first. We will move these bags of apples to our overflow fridge out in the garage. It's just stuffed full of the apples. We bring a bag in whenever we want them. And then once the temperature drops, because this fridge is out in our garage, once it gets below freezing outside consistently, these apples are in danger of freezing, and we learned that the hard way last year. So we will definitely bring those down into the cellar, probably in the middle of December, because the cellar remains somewhere between maybe 35 to 40 degrees, which is the perfect temperature for apple storage. But in the meantime, we're just enjoying eating all these fresh apples, doing all of our favorite baking projects. I've got Hannah here working on an apple crisp with me for breakfast. We hand rolled our oats, and we're going to bake this up and serve it with some delicious protein, some sausage and some eggs. And I mean, we just can't get enough of cooking and baking with apples this time of year. It really does remind us of October. Having fresh apples through the winter to eat is wonderful. We're finishing up the last of a lot of the fresh vegetables besides the cold hardy ones I mentioned earlier in this video. Once the frost came, all the things like the peppers and the tomatoes were done, and it's time to harvest some of the other fresh food that will be available for us in our pantry throughout the year. And winter squash is one of those items. Things like winter squash, we have some root vegetables, like onions, potatoes, carrots, garlic, things like that. That will keep us in fresh food through the winter. A lot of people get concerned that we're only eating canned and preserved fruits and vegetables, and that they think you have to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables year round. And so things like winter squash are a great way to accomplish that, because once again, just like with apples that you get in the grocery store, the squash you purchase in the grocery store are typically harvested in the fall, and then they can be from last season if you're purchasing them next year at some point. And so they are just designed by God to not need to be preserved. They will stay fresh. If you cure the rind properly, these were left out on the vine here in the heat until closer to the first frost. And then we can harvest them and bring them inside and store them somewhere cool and dark and dry, like the root cellar, and they're going to stay good for many months. It kind of depends on the squash variety. So this is a Canada crookneck squash. I got the seed from my friend Sarah at Living Traditions Homestead. She recommended this for me because we were really battling squash bugs with a lot of squash and just not getting any harvest. And I only put out 3 little plants earlier in the year and kind of forgot about them, and we harvested all of these squash from them. So not my biggest harvest ever, but for putting out 3 plants, I'm very excited. And these taste like a butternut squash, and that is how we will use them. And Sarah was right. There were no squash bugs that attacked these plants, so this is what I will be growing from now on in place of traditional butternut squash. So they're just down in the cellar, and whenever we want some fresh squash for a meal, we can just grab a couple and bring them upstairs. I also have some room on this cart for some pie pumpkins that I'm going to put on the top shelf. And I had a couple of these that I harvested that you can see where the stem broke off, and those are not going to store well. They're at danger of molding in that spot. So we're going to go ahead and cook up some of these, make a lovely fall lunch. I just chopped up my butternut squash with a couple other veggies and some apples that I had harvested from the garden. We drizzled it with a little bit of avocado oil and then salt and peppered it, and went ahead and put that in the oven on about 350 degrees for, I want to say it was roasting for somewhere between 45 to 55 minutes. The house smelled amazing, and just a lovely way to use up some of these fresh veggies that we pulled out of the garden before the last frost. Look at those beautiful colors. I'm just so excited to have squash finally available. It's one of my favorite things, and I actually tend to crave butternut squash soup when I'm pregnant. So that is what I decided to make out of these roasted veggies. So I had peeled the top of the squash that's easy to peel. I had left the rind on the squash, the bottom part, and that's fine because this type of squash, the Canada crookneck, the skin of that is edible. But I literally just took all the roasted veggies except for that garlic and threw it straight into the pot. I did need to pull those little garlic cloves out of their skin there. We roasted it in the skin, and then it's super easy to just remove this way, much easier than peeling it before you roast it. So now we have our pot full of our veggies. I'm pouring in 1 quart of turkey broth. We can't have dairy, but cream would be delicious in this. And I'm also going to add just some leftover tomato sauce I had that didn't fit in a canning batch. Now, if you want to keep this dairy-free and add some cream, you can add coconut cream, but I do not prefer that coconut taste mixed with all of these vegetables. It just isn't my favorite, but you can try that if you do like a coconut flavor. But it's still really rich and creamy with that broth in it. Sprinkled some parsley and salt and pepper over the top. This also makes a really great pasta sauce. So if you wanted to make this, you can eat it just as a soup, or you can put it over some noodles or even some rice. Just a great way to use your delicious butternut squash coming in from the garden this time of year. Now, whenever I have an especially big squash that's just huge and beautiful, I want to save the seeds of that particular squash. So I scooped out all the guts and put it in a bowl of water, and I'm just pulling out a lot of the really fleshy bits. And then we're going to leave this bowl of water and seeds sitting there overnight for about 24 hours. The solids and the unviable seeds will float to the top, and you can just kind of pour those off, and this is what you'll be left with. These seeds should be viable, and so we're going to strain all of this out, and we just need to dry these out before we can save these seeds. So it was just about 24 hours in water. I strained it out. I like to take a paper plate like this. I've also, if I don't have paper plates in the house, you can use a paper towel, something like that. Just label it with whatever variety of squash you're saving from. And then we're going to dump those seeds out on the plate and leave them somewhere kind of dry and warm, not super warm. Like I'm not going to put them right by the wood stove or that could cook the seeds, but just somewhere nice and warm to help speed up the drying process. After about 7 days, they'll be dry enough to get in an envelope and label and add to our seed collection, which over the winter I keep my seed collection either in a fridge or a freezer. That's a great place to store them to keep your seeds nice and fresh and viable for next growing season. Speaking of next growing season, it is the time of year to start our first project of the 2025 garden, and that is planting garlic. At least where I'm at in my zone, which is kind of the border of Zone 5, Zone 6 in Northwest Ohio, October, sometimes you can get away with it into November, is the time of year where we typically plant our garlic out. If you try to wait and plant it later on in the winter or even in the spring of next year, you're not going to give your garlic long enough in our zone to grow really big, beautiful bulbs. So we get it started this time of year, but my garden beds have been depleted of a lot of nutrients over the course of this growing season. So before I can plant that garlic, I do need to feed my garden beds and top them off with a little extra soil. So I have this pile of composted wood chips, and I'm going to mix them with a little bit of chicken litter, and we're going to top off our garden beds before we get our garlic planted. And this is some good exercises, preparing me for labor. I find if I push my body really hard during the end of pregnancy, it gets me that much prepared for the hard work of labor. So getting my exercise in the garden. I got my beds all topped off with some nice nutritious soil here, and we're going to get planting. I'm doing 3 varieties of garlic this year. I get my seed from my friend Mason. I've mentioned him here before for you guys. He is who we source a lot of our hay from, and he comes every year and brings us hay and the calves that we grow out for our beef. And so this year for garlic seed, he offered music variety, which we've grown before and we love. He had a Spanish red and he had a German red. And since he offered all 3 to me, I said, I'm going to try them all and see how I like them. So we typically grow the type of garlic that will produce scapes. That's what I'm doing this year. And I'm growing a lot this year because my hope is to grow enough that I won't need to purchase seed next year. Typically, we only grow enough for our culinary needs, but I'm just going to check and see if I can grow enough for seed next year as well. Once I get my garden cloves planted, I always top the bed off with some comfrey leaves. This is an herb we grow in our garden specifically for fertilizing garden beds. It's really high in nitrogen and other nutrients that are good for the soil. So I almost use it like a mulch here on top of my garlic beds. And that will break down underneath the straw layer that we use to kind of insulate the garlic over the winter, and it will help feed the soil as well. And I got 3 beds of garlic planted on this particular day that I'm showing you, and I still probably have about 3 more beds to go. I only got it half planted before my pregnant body said, hold up, you need to take a break. And our plan was for the next day for Adam to help me plant the rest of it. But I'm going to show you here in a little bit how that plan kind of got turned upside down. We had other priorities to work on the next day. So my garlic didn't get all planted this week, but that's okay. Like I said, we've gotten away with planting it well into November before and still had great results. We just can't plant it, obviously, after we have a deep freeze that would make the soil really hard and compacted. So just taking those garlic cloves, 1 garlic clove out of a whole bulb will grow you a whole bulb. So each of these bulbs has maybe 7 or 8 cloves in it, and that will produce 7 or 8 garlic bulbs for me next year. So this is the big problem that we woke up to that I told you about. The morning that Adam was going to go out and help me in the garden, we woke up to a tree that had come down on one of our pasture fences. So thankfully, Adam was home from work this day, And thankfully, our little heifer calves did not figure out how to get out of this fence before we discovered the problem. Because can you imagine if it had been a day where Adam were at work and my oldest son was at work, and my second oldest son right now has a broken finger on his hand and can't really help. And I would have been left to figure out how to handle this situation, running around chasing calves around the property with my big pregnant belly. It would have been quite a sight.
All right, friends, that is it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this little peek into what October looks like on the homestead here for us. I want to once again thank the sponsor of this video, Backwoods Home Magazine. Make sure you check out the link in the video description and you can get 50% off a subscription. That is an amazing deal. I think it's $13 for an annual subscription to a wonderful publication that is just going to teach you so much about homesteading. So if you like my content, check this out. And we are going to be back next week with another video. In the meantime, I hope you guys are all having a wonderful week, and we will see you later. All right, bye.